Hello, my dear students. And after air, as I promised you, that I will be bringing you a new chapter, which is chapter 5 of your book of the geography section. And this time the topic is water. So, am I going to discuss in this topic? I will talk about the water cycle. I will talk about the conservation of water, how water is distributed, movement of the ocean water, waves, tides, tsunamis, and the ocean currents. So, without wasting any further, let's start with the topic. Now, the first question which comes to our mind is that why is Earth an unique planet? In fact, it is the presence of water which makes Earth a unique planet. Now, whenever I talk about the water cycle, maybe in grade 7, the three things that you have learned is evaporation, condensation, and precipitation. So, these three things, if I might have my pointer, so you need to understand one, evaporation, number two, the condensation, and number three, the precipitation. That is what constitutes the water cycle. Right now, what is actually the water cycle? The continuous movement of water, right, which involves the process of evaporation, condensation, and precipitation. Now, this is what is the water cycle. So, it's a continuous movement of water involving three most important processes: evaporation, condensation, and precipitation. So what happens? It starts from the evaporation. Evaporation कैसे होगी? It is the heat of the sun which evaporates water and changes into water vapor. Now, what will happen to the water vapor? The water vapor, being warm, will rise up and will gradually cool down and will condense to form the clouds. Now, what happens to the clouds? When the clouds cannot take more moisture, obviously that results in rainfall, precipitation in the form of rainfall, snowfall, hailstorm, and water returns to earth falling on the land or sea. Now, water that falls on the land also collects in the rivers, which carries it back to the ocean. So this continuous movement of water is known as the water cycle or the hydrological cycle. Now, what can impact the water cycle? Number one, cutting down of the trees, that is deforestation, polluting the water bodies, and wasting water. So, these three things can actually impact the water cycle. Right. Now, this is also a very important question. Normally, it is asked that what is the Water Day? On which day is it celebrated? Now, on which date it is celebrated? Water Day is celebrated every year on the 22nd of March. Now, one thing which comes to our mind is that water is renewable, it is recyclable, but yet we say that water is becoming scarce. So, number one thing, before we understand that where does the water come from, what are the various how water gets distributed, the first and the foremost thing is, whatever the situation might be, we say water is renewable, water is recyclable, but of course water is scarce. So how to conserve water? Number one, ensure all taps and appliances are in order so there is no leakages. Avoid flushing trash in the toilet. Use bucket for watering plants rather than pipes which have lot of which kind of give out lot of water, and lot of water is wasted like that. So why not use a bucket for watering plants? Use water left in the bottles to water the plants. Of course, when you go to school and you carry your water bottles, it's very rarely that they are finished. So whatever bottles you are left with when you come back from the school, rather than putting them in the drain, it'll be a good idea to water your plants. Oops, I'm so sorry. Okay, use machine wash only if the load is full. Reuse the water used for rinsing clothes, and I think making rainwater harvesting compulsory will also solve this problem. All right. The next thing we'll be talking about is the ocean. So it is this Pacific Ocean, Atlantic Ocean, then there is Arctic Ocean, then there is Indian Ocean, and the Southern or the Antarctic Ocean, right? So let's move on to the next topic. Now, This is very important, distribution of the water bodies. See, one, you need to understand कि हमारी अर्थ जो है, it is known as the water planet. So 71% of the earth consists of water, and 29% of the earth is actually consisting of land. So the 71% of the water, it is found in the form of oceans, seas, lakes and rivers. Now this domain of water, where the water is found, 71% of the earth, ocean, seas, lakes, river, so domain of water is called as hydrosphere. Now we also say that by that percentage, we say 2 by third of earth is covered by water. So out of this two portion that we see, out of the three portion, two third of the earth is covered with water. So out of this portion which is covered with water, 97% of the water that is found in the ocean is saline water. If you can just give me a second. All right, so 97% of the water that is found in the ocean is saline. That means it is salty water and it is not fit for consumption. So that means if 97% of the water is saline or salty water, then only 3% is the water which is which is fit for consumption. So that means out of that 3%, 2% is found in the form of ice caps or glaciers, and only 1% in the form of surface water. That is found in rivers, lakes, and groundwater. So this is how the water is distributed on the earth. 71% of the earth consists of water in the form of ocean, seas, lakes, and rivers, and this domain of water is called as hydrosphere. 29% is land. Two-thirds of the earth's surface is covered with water. 97% of the water is saline, which is found in oceans, and 3% is fit for consumption, and out of which 2% is found in the ice caps and 1% in the form of surface water. Now, I was talking about the salinity in the oceans. Now, salinity means the amount of salt that is present in the ocean water. So, if I take about 1000 gram of ocean water, that means 35 gram of salt it contains. Dead Sea has quite a bit. It has about 240 grams, not 100, sorry, just 240 grams per 1000 gram. Now, the movement of ocean water, and we will be specifically discussing about the waves, tides, and the ocean currents. So let's move on to that. First is the waves. Now, before we discuss the waves, why don't we talk about the ocean? And now, oceans, what are oceans? They are very large bodies which surround the continents. So if I just go back to my slide, you will understand this. Now, these continents, so these oceans are the water bodies which surround these continents, right? Okay, so there are four main oceans on the surface of Earth, that is Pacific, Atlantic, Indian Ocean, and the Arctic Ocean. Now, oceans have a moderating effect on the climate of the coastal areas, and ocean water is never still. Now, this is where we need to understand about the waves, tides, and the ocean currents. But it's very important for you to understand that oceans are the large water bodies which surround the continents, and there are four main oceans on the surface of the Earth: Pacific, Atlantic, Indian Ocean, and the Arctic Ocean. Right. So now we, talk about these movements like waves or tides or ocean currents. What causes these movement? I mean, why do you have these kind of waves, or why do you have, if I may just talk about the tides, that it is low tide or it is the high tide. So why do we have, and why do we have these currents or the ocean currents, and why these all movements are there in the ocean? Now, these movements are, one, because of the difference in temperature, number two, because of the salinity, and number three, because of the prevailing winds. So these are the three factors which actually cause these movements. So let's move right. So first I will be talking about the waves. Now, what exactly are the waves? So waves are when the surface water of the ocean, it actually rises and falls alternatively, that is called the waves. So waves is when the surface water, the water which is just on the surface of the ocean, that moves, that rises and falls alternatively, they are called as waves. Now, what causes this movement of the water? That is the action of the wind. It is the wind which causes this rise and fall of the surface water of the ocean, right? Now, another thing which is you have to understand is the wave will always travel in the direction of the wind. So if wind is in this direction, the wave will also travel in the direction of the wind. And how much will be the shape or the height of the wave, that will also depend on the speed of the wind. That means these waves are when the surface water of the ocean rises and falls alternatively. They are caused by the action of wind, and the wave travels in the direction of the wind. Shape and height of the wave depends upon the speed of the wind. Now, if you could see these giant, waves like this, these are known as tsunami, right? And they are caused by earthquake or the volcanic eruptions on the ocean floor. Now, basically, if I take this as an ocean, so this is the ocean floor. So even at the bottom of the ocean there could be some earthquake or volcanic eruption, so that leads to these giant waves called as the tsunamis. Now these waves travel at a great speed and they cause widespread damage all along the coastal areas. Now, so I forgot to tell you that tsunami actually comes from the word su, which means a harbor, and nami means waves. So they're also called as the harbor waves, and they are caused due to underwater earthquake, volcanic eruptions, and massive underwater explosions. Now, this is the Asian tsunami, which has been referred to you in your book on 26th December 2004. Now, this tsunami, अगर मैं बात करूं कि किस कंट्रीज़ को उन्होंने इफ़ेक्ट किया, तो मोस्टली साउथ एंड साउथ ईस्ट एशियन कंट्रीज़ जो है, दैट वाज अफेक्टेड लाइक इंडिया, श्रीलंका, म्यांमार, थाईलैंड, Malaysia, right? So all these countries were affected by this tsunami. Now we come to the tide. Now, see, you have to understand waves. Now, this could be a wave. Wave is something else. Now, tides are the amount of, if I say it in a very simple manner, that what exactly is a tide? So I would say, so tides are, so if I just say that, okay, tides are like long period waves which move through the ocean in response to the gravitational force or the forces exerted by um, moon and the sun. Now, see, basically these tides, they originate in the oceans and they progress towards the coastlines where they appear as regular rise and fall of the earth's surface. So let me explain it to you again with a little more examples. So tides, as I told you, they are periodic rise and fall of ocean water at regular intervals twice a day, and they are experienced in oceans and seas. Now, this is important. When the level of the sea water rises, then it is called as the high tide. And when the level of the sea water falls, it is called as the low tide. Now, so what actually causes these tides, a high tide or low tide? Now, it is the gravitational attraction of the moon and the sun which causes these tides, and they occur twice a day. Now, as the moon is closer to Earth, it exerts larger gravitational pull, causing high tides. See, tides are basically of two types. One we call as the spring tides, the other we call as the neap tides. Now, spring tides are, if you just see this example, during the full moon and the new moon. Now, these are we know that there are four phases to this moon. So, when it is full moon and it is new moon, in that case, moon and Earth are in the same line, resulting in the extra tides, and these are called as the spring tides. Now, when moon is in the first and the last quarter, then the sun and moon, if you could just see them, they both form a kind of right angle, and then the water gets drawn in it diagonally opposite direction, and the result is the low tides. If you could just see from the diagram itself, because the water gets drawn diagonally in the opposite directions, right? So that is how this low tides or neap tides are caused, and high tides or spring tides are caused like that. Now you would probably feel that, are these tides useful? I mean, what is the use of that? Now, tides are very useful for navigation, for fishing, for trade. In fact, high tides help the ship to enter or leave the harbors easily. Tides also help in fishing, because when a high tide will come, so that tide will get more fish near the shore, helping the fishermen to get plentiful catch. Now, tides also help to generate electricity. Now, as the sea water gushes in during the high tide, because obviously high tide is when more sea water is gushing in, of course, the energy can be tapped, and that can be used to generate electricity. Now, India is yet to start utilizing this tidal energy. So if tides are useful, they are useful in navigation, fishing, and trade. High tides help the ship to enter or leave the harbors easily. Then they help in fishing, because high tide will get more fish which when they come near the shore. And of course, they can also generate electricity, because as more water gushes in through the high tide, energy can be tapped and it can be used to generate electricity. Right now, these are the ocean currents. Now, although it is not that much in detail in your book this time, because in grade 7 they haven't talked about the specific name of the ocean currents, but of course we'll talk about the warm ocean currents, the cold ocean currents, and what these ocean currents, how they can influence the climate or the economy, right? Now, all right. So first we move on to ocean currents. So what and how are they formed, right? Now it's the horizontal movement. Now you know this is vertical, but this is the horizontal movement of ocean water in the form of streams, and it is in a definite direction, that is called an ocean current. Now there are various factors which led to ocean current. It is the because of the planetary winds, because of the difference in temperature, density of the ocean water, shape of the coastline, and the rotation of the earth. So there are these lots of factors which actually give rise to these ocean currents. All right, so let's move on to these ocean currents. Now, with the red one shows the ocean currents which are warm, and the blue ocean currents are the warm which are cold. So ocean currents may be warm or cold, and the currents which move from the equator and which originate near the equator and move toward the poles are warm, and the currents which move towards the tropics or the lower latitudes are the cold currents. And you also have to understand that warm currents are less dense than the cold currents. Now these it's the currents which actually can impact the climate as well, because there are these areas which are really frozen throughout the winters, but because of the warm currents, the water doesn't freeze here, right? Now, let's just have a little difference between the two. Now, the warm currents, they move from the equator to the poles. Now, this is the equator, and this is the North Pole, and this is the South Pole, right? So warm currents, they move from the equator to the poles, and what do? They raise the temperature of the coastal areas, whereas the cold currents, they move from the poles to the equator and they lower the temperature. I told you in the previous lecture, temperature ko easy karne ke liye just think temperature means hot or heat. So lower the temperature means ठंडे हो जाते हैं, raise the temperature मतलब उसको और ज़्यादा वो गर्म कर देते हैं. Now, एक आपने और बात करना है. Ocean currents move clockwise in the northern hemisphere, and they are anti-clockwise in the southern hemisphere. So let me just give you a look here. Now, in the northern hemisphere, they move clockwise, right? In the northern hemisphere, they will move clockwise. In the southern hemisphere, they move the anti-clockwise. Right now, what are their influence on the climate and the economic activities? See, once I told you that warm currents जो है बच्चे वो land surface का जो temperature है, heat जो है they will raise, while the old cold currents जो है they will lower the temperature of the coastal areas. Now, where these both currents meet, the warm and the cold currents, oops. Mm, mm, oops, there is some mistake. I will just move on to that one. Mm, if you could just allow me this from the current slide. Right. Now, see, this is what we were just talking about here, that these ocean currents, we were talking about the influence on them. See, one, I told you that warm currents, they raise the temperature over the land surface, whereas the cold currents will lower the temperature of the coastal areas, right? So let me have my pointer. Yes, right. Now, in places where the warm and the cold currents meet, a dense fog is produced, which reduces the visibility, making it risky for the ships to sail. But warm currents also keep the oceans and the seas free from iceberg, thus providing safe and easy sailing in the cold areas. Now, the most important is the areas where the warm and cold currents meet are also the best fishing grounds in the world. Planktons, which are the excellent source of food for the fishes, is also found in the abundance here. So, of course, one is that the warm currents will raise the temperature, the cold currents will lower the temperature, and where these two currents meet, the dense fog is formed, but that also becomes the best fishing ground in the world. And planktons, which are the excellent source of food for fishes, are also found here. और जहाँ पर आपके warm currents हैं, the oceans are free from the icebergs, right? All right. Now, so I had just got these examples. Now the ports of Norway, they remain ice free even in the winters. Normally Norway is a part of Europe and it would be freezing during the winters, but here it remains ice free. Why? Because of the effect of the warm ocean current. While the coast of Newfoundland, they remain frozen for about 9 months because of the cold currents. Now there's another thing which I also missed to tell you, that the winds which blow over the warm currents, because they also have the moisture in them, so they result in a good rainfall, whereas winds which blow over the cold currents are dry, hence the rainfall is very scanty. So this also explains why the west coast of Europe receives a good amount of rainfall because of the North Atlantic drift, while the Atacama Desert of South America is the result of the cold Peru current. Right, so this is all I have for you, where we have discussed about the water cycle. We discussed how to conserve water. We also discussed the distribution of the water. We talked about the movement in the ocean, waves, tides, and ocean currents. So with this I complete this lecture, and I'm sure very soon I will be also coming up with more questions on these chapters and some kind of a 10-minute revision for these chapters. Till then, listen to these slides, and of course read your book and try to understand. For any queries, of course, you have your comment box. You can just put your queries in the comment box, and I would be more than happy to answer all your queries. And moreover, I would also like you to request in case you want certain videos, because in every school the classes are not, the syllabi doesn't go by the chapters like 1 2 3, obviously. With regard to how your teachers think that which chapter is more useful, that is how they divide their syllabi. So in case if your chapters which I have not making the video on are being done right now and you want a video on that, please tell me. I will be more than happy to post a video for you. Thank you so much for watching this video. See you very soon with a new video. Thank you so much.